On the morning of February 1542, a 19-year-old woman stood within the four-poster bed in the lodging chamber of the Tower of London, as the cold stone walls surrounded her and the dark drapes concealed the flickering candle flames. Catherine Howard calmly prepared herself for death. A velvet cap lay on the pillow beside her, obscuring her face from view, and soon it would be placed over her head as her life ebbed away. But what did these final moments look like? What did they feel like for the once young and beautiful queen? And how did this former favorite of the king become the object of his hatred, destined for such a grim end? This is my channel, and today we are exploring the dramatic fall and terrible end of Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth wife. Now I'm sure many of you have heard of Catherine Parr, Henry's last wife who outlived him and helped to shape the legacy of his children. But what came before her was another young queen, Catherine Howard, whose life was cut tragically short and whose story is fascinating and tragic. Catherine was born in 1523, the daughter of the infamous and disgraced Duke of Norfolk and his wife Anne, when her father lost his titles and was sent to the Tower of London, never to return. Catherine's mother sought the protection of her brother, the Earl of Surrey, and raised the young girl in his household. Here, Catherine's uncle had several mistresses, exposing the teenager to adult relationships before she was emotionally mature enough to understand them, and these experiences would come back to harm her in later life. At the age of 17, Catherine married Henry VIII, a courtier who had been one of her mother's lovers and who was more than twice her age. He, too, was involved in affairs with other women, leaving Catherine feeling neglected. Yet despite her unhappy marriage, she found favor at court and caught the eye of none other than Henry VIII. In July 1540, Henry's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, was sent to a country house near London, having fallen out of favor with the king. Soon after, Catherine was summoned to the palace and presented to Henry as a replacement. She was strikingly beautiful, with glowing skin, fine eyes, red hair, and golden curls. Most importantly, she was young, full of life, and not yet 18 years old. The king was instantly enamored and wasted no time in ending his 4-month marriage to Anne, blaming it on a lack of sexual chemistry. But the real reason for the swift annulment is revealed in the king's next action. He shackled Catherine Howard and Henry VIII together, forcing them to consummate their marriage, which produced 2 children, and then immediately arranged for a second wedding between himself and the young girl. Once again, all in the span of a few months, on July 28, 1540, the wedding took place. Catherine became queen at the age of 17 and a half. It seemed Catherine was destined for greatness. Her wedding night was blissful and passionate. The king was besotted and playful. In the weeks following their union, he gave Catherine everything she desired. Gowns, jewels, and horses were among her new possessions. Catherine moved into the apartments formerly occupied by Anne of Cleves, and even had the fourth Queen's portrait removed from tapestries at her own expense. Catherine was reveling in her fortune, playing the role of the devoted young wife, while secretly despising her husband's cruel treatment of his former spouse. But Catherine's youth, inexperience, and naivety made her vulnerable to the machinations of others around the aging monarch, and her own indiscretion would eventually seal her fate. Her first obstacle was Henry's ever-present paranoia. His health was deteriorating rapidly. Gout and leg ulcers caused excruciating pain and mobility issues, contributing to a vicious temper and fits of depression. This volatile state left him lashing out at everyone, including Catherine. In December 1541, a disagreement over a painting led to the king striking the queen, causing her to miscarry, while Henry soon apologized and showered Catherine with gifts. This event shook her confidence and awareness of her precarious situation. Others sensed opportunity amidst the queen's distress. One was Thomas Culpeper, a handsome young courtier and a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. In the spring of 1541, he began a secret affair with Catherine, promising her love and attention that her husband lacked. They exchanged secret love letters, expressing deep affection and desire. Unfortunately for the pair, these very letters would be seized and used to bring down both of them. By late 1541, Catherine felt isolated and weary of court. Her relationship with Henry grew colder, and the king spent little time at the palace, instead retiring to his hunting lodge at Hampton Court. During a visit there by Catherine, she encountered a lady-in-waiting, Elizabeth Wilford, who had previously accused the queen of slander and rudeness. When Catherine playfully remarked that Wilford's skirt was too tight, Wilford swore revenge and informed the king upon her return to London. Henry was already suspicious of Catherine and eager for any excuse to punish her. He interrogated her about the incident, and her flippant response confirmed his belief that she had become haughty and arrogant. Furthermore, rumors spread that the queen was neglecting her duties, refusing to attend council meetings, and avoiding public appearances. With whispers of discontent growing, Catherine and Thomas Culpeper believed themselves to be safe from discovery. However, the king's spies were everywhere, even in Catherine's own chambers. On January 29, 1542, one of her ladies-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, revealed their affair to Henry, having been promised forgiveness for her own transgressions. The next day, Culpeper was arrested along with Catherine's uncle, the Earl of Surrey, who had also had an affair with the king's wife. Catherine and her friend, Lady Rochford, were taken into custody on February. Chained together, they were transported to the Tower of London, charged with adultery, incest, and treason. In the Tower, Catherine was stripped of her jewelry and clothes, save for a single gown and shift. The charges against her were grave, carrying a mandatory death sentence. Despite her protests of innocence, Catherine confessed to the affair with Thomas Culpeper under torture. Her statement implicated her uncle and 5 courtiers. However, her confession was coerced and unreliable, given under duress and filled with inconsistencies. The next day, February 1542, Catherine and her 5 co-defendants were publicly executed at the Tower of London. Catherine went to the scaffold first, displaying remarkable dignity and courage in her final moments. She knelt before a velvet cloth, hiding her face and awaiting her turn. When it came, she rose and delivered a prepared speech, declaring her innocence of treason, accepting responsibility for her actions, and offering thanks to God and her family. She then turned to the crowd and asked for prayers for her soul. Finally, she laid her head upon the block and awaited the fatal blow. The Queen's chaplain, Dr. John Feckenham, was present at the scaffold and reported her bearing was such that if death had come to her before, she had been well worthy to be called a martyr. After Catherine's execution, her head was cut off and embalmed, then hung from the prison walls to deter other prisoners from following in her footsteps. Meanwhile, her body was hastily buried in the nearby church of St. Peter ad Vincula, now famously known as the burial site of several of Henry VIII's victims. Although Catherine Howard met her demise at the age of only 19, her story does not end here. In fact, her narrative has been reevaluated and reframed several times throughout history. Some modern scholars argue that Catherine's actions were a response to her upbringing, and that she was groomed for a life of sexual exploitation. Her story reflects the dangerous combination of aristocratic privilege, unchecked male desires, and the limitations placed on women in Tudor England. There is a common misconception that Catherine Howard was executed for adultery, but the charges against her were actually treason and incest. By portraying her as a naive young girl, historians have challenged the idea that Catherine willingly participated in her own downfall. Instead, they argue that she was manipulated by those around her, such as Thomas Culpeper, who preyed on her vulnerability and inexperience. Moreover, Catherine's fall from grace coincided with a broader context of religious and political turmoil. The alliance between her family, the Howards, and the Catholic Church made them targets of Protestant reformers, who saw the king's marriage to a young, inexperienced girl as an opportunity to undermine the influence of the Catholic elite. By uncovering Catherine's past relationships and using them against her, her enemies were able to paint her as a symbol of the decadence and corruption of the Catholic Church. What's more, Catherine's conviction was secured through the use of parliamentary attainder, a legal instrument that allowed for the condemnation of individuals without trial. This maneuver circumvented the usual legal protections afforded to members of the aristocracy and ensured Catherine's swift removal from the throne. By stripping her of her titles and executing her without due process, the Parliament sent a clear message to other potential rivals of the king. Ultimately, Catherine Howard's story serves as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the lengths to which those in authority will go to protect their interests. Her life and death offer a glimpse into the inner workings of Tudor politics and the complex web of alliances, betrayals, and power struggles that shaped the era. And so we must ask ourselves, what exactly was Catherine Howard's crime? Was she guilty of adultery and incest as she was portrayed at the time? Or was she simply a pawn in a larger game of religious and political maneuvering? And how did her own experiences of neglect and abuse at the hands of her family and the men in her life contribute to her ultimate downfall? As we reflect on the life and death of Catherine Howard, let us remember that she was more than just a tragic figure in a Tudor soap opera. She was a real person with hopes, dreams, and fears who lived and died during a time when women were often treated as little more than property. Her story continues to resonate with us today, because it speaks to the timeless themes of power, corruption, and the abuse of women. Now I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think Catherine Howard's crime was? And do you agree with the modern interpretation of her story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, I hope you learned something new today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to learn more about amazing history. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.